There's no reason for this nation to be controlled by ungodly people. But the Christians have let it happen because they want to gather on Sunday morning and have their little bless me clubs and then go out real happy, hold the hand of Jesus for a couple of hours on a Sunday morning, and then walk out and hold the devil's hand all the rest of the week. Go back to Romans chapter 1. We're getting there. In verse 20 it says, the invisible things of him from the creation of the world. Now, the invisible realm is the spiritual realm. Now, you can disbelieve what I say now. I can't prove it, but you can't disprove me either, so it's a stalemate. I believe there are angels present here this morning. Hanging out maybe around the ceiling. Who knows where they're hanging out? I don't know, but they're here. Because wherever God's people are gathered, they're ministering angels. Now, does anyone see one? Check it out, because if you do, I'll let you testify. Well, there's an invisible realm here. We can't see it, but it's there. Why? Because the Word of God says it's there. Now, in the tabernacle, there was I hope you know a little bit about the tabernacle. I mean, we've had enough teachings across this nation and interest people in the tabernacle. But in the tabernacle, there was a little house in the rear portion. You want to use a tent or meeting or whatever you want to call it, tent of the congregation. Well, the first veiling that went over that, I'll bring some overheads tomorrow. First veiling over that was a veiling that had angels that were embroidered into the material. Now, they were just angels embroidered into the material. They weren't real or anything. It was just a picture. But when the priest would come into the holy place in the morning, he would dress the lamps that were on the lampstand, and he would trim the wicks and whatever, and then he would put a little incense on the golden altar, and once a week they all met around the table of the showbread. But every time he would look to the ceiling, he would see these angels embroidered in the material and be reminded that God's angels were always present. In other words, God always uses the natural to reveal the spiritual. We can't see into the spiritual, but God gives us something somewhere in the natural to understand the spiritual. Are you with me? Don't miss this, okay? And it says, by that principle, that it says the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. They're not ambiguous. They're seen absolutely clearly. How? Being understood by the things that are made. And so we find that same concept over in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And I encourage you, if you study the Word of God, always let it be confirmed in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, we find the same pattern. It's dealing with the body and the natural body and the spiritual body, but there's a pattern here. It's the same thing we just read in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 44. And so it is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. And so it is written that the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. The last Adam was made a quickening spirit. Verse 46. Howbeit that was not first which is spiritual, but that which is natural, and afterward that which is spiritual. So God always sends the natural on the scene to reveal to us the what? The spiritual. Do you understand that before I go to the next point? Everyone understand what I'm saying? God always gives us a natural. That's what the Old Testament is full of, all the naturals, to let us understand what God is doing in the spiritual. So, if Nicodemus is talking about the issue of being born again, and if it's really he's talking about it in the spiritual, he was also relating it to a natural, because he responded in a natural, can a man who is old enter into his mother's womb the second time and be born again? So he understood this as a natural birth. So if revival is simply the birthing of new children into the kingdom, then as God began to share that with me, then I had to go backward and reconstruct the whole birthing process. And I came up with some interesting things, and I began to see a picture develop, and the reason that we really are not, so many people are not into revival because of a reason. First of all, how are children born? I understand the biological thing. I'm not talking about that. God's intent for children to be born is that two people would fall in love with each other. they would marry and have children. And so that's God's intent. So if that's God's intent in the natural, then there must be a parallel to that in the spiritual.